views and opinions expressed in this podcast by the host and or the guest do not necessarily reflect the views of the host and or Paranormal Buzz Radio and or its sponsors. Use of any material produced by Paranormal Buzz Radio without express written consent is prohibited. Paranormal Buzz Radio will not be held responsible for you holding your knees, crying, and rocking in a corner in a puddle of your own urine, or being beheaded by a group of children in the cornfield. In fact, if you come across a group of children in a cornfield, we promise to make fun of you as you run away screaming in terror. Listener discretion is advised.
You're listening to RAP Paranormal and Friends with your hosts,
Kim Purvis
and Allison Robinson. Make sure to check us out on our Facebook pages, RAP Paranormal and Friends and RAP. Hey everyone, welcome to RAP Paranormal and Friends. Sorry about the delay. We were having some technical difficulties, but things seem to be working okay now, so hopefully you guys can hear us. We have a special guest tonight. She's a witch, she's an author. She has been inspired by Irish fairies, and she teaches classes on Irish myth and magical practices and fairies and all that kind of jazz if you're into that in the U.S. and internationally. So please welcome Morgan Daimler to the show. Welcome again.
Thank you for having me. I'm really glad to be here tonight.
Yes, we are glad to have you as well. So Morgan, if you could please kind of give us a background on yourself and how did you become a witch?
Sure. So I grew up in the Irish American diaspora. My grandfather was from Ireland, and I kind of grew up with a lot of the folk beliefs from Ireland. And I always sort of believed in fairies, and my family, just because of the way they were, like no one ever discouraged me. Like no one ever told me like that's not real, you shouldn't believe in that. And so when I was about 11, a good friend of mine had gotten a book on neo-pagan witchcraft. And I just remember thinking like it really clicked with sort of my worldview as it was. And then moving forward from there, I'd kind of gotten interested in studying folklore because of my interest in fairies. And yeah, and everything just kind of came together from there. So I kind of incorporate both of those perspectives, I think, in what I study.
Okay. Now, does this, with fairies and folklore and everything, does this intertwine, or is this how you got interested in writing these books that you have written about? You've written books about Thor, Odin, and then you have your Into Shadow, which is about elves and dragons and
all that good stuff.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much. I had initially self-published some books that were looking at some older, actually Scottish material, which is kind of funny now because my main focus is Irish, but that's where I started. And then I had kind of realized in talking to some people that there were a lot of people that were interested in one particular Irish goddess, and that was the Morrigan. And there were a couple books that were out, but they were like hefty books. There was no like quick intro. There was no easy way to kind of get into the subject if you didn't really know much about that particular deity. So I had kind of decided, if no one else is going to do it, why not me? I guess.
Yeah.
And I wrote my first, they're called Pagan Portals. It's a series my publisher does, but they're just short, about 100-page introductions. And the idea is to have a book that's kind of accessible to anybody and can be a good starting place for people who are interested and want to go further, or people who maybe are knowledgeable and want a refresher, or want to see if there's any basic stuff that they missed out on. So I've written quite a few pagan portals at this point. I seem to have a talent for writing introductory books. Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of how that all started.
Okay, so you're talking about, pagan and paganism and things like that. For our listeners who aren't sure what that is, can you kind of...
Which is
Yep.
Yeah, which is totally fair.
Yep.
Yeah, pagan is just a belief in many gods, more than one god. So if we're talking about like pre-Christian Ireland, that would be pagan, and you would have like the Morrigan is one particular goddess. I've written books about Brigid, who's another Irish goddess, and then the Dagda, Loom, and Anan. Those are different gods that we find in the mythology. You'd mentioned Odin and Thor, who are two Norse gods. I actually have a book coming out on Freya the end of this month, who's a Norse goddess. Yep.
All right.
Yeah, so when we're talking paganism, we're just talking about basically that, the pre-Christian deities. And my focus is Ireland, as I said, and then I've dabbled a bit in the Norse material.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of people say, this was back earlier. I don't know if it's now, but, early 90s and things like that, people were saying, witches and paganism is bad. What do you think it's like now in the 21st century? What do you think? Do you think people have a more understanding of this, or do you think they're still like, this is like Satan's work, like they used to be, kind of,
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question, because I got into paganism in 1991. So right in that fun 90s period.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there's still places where it's difficult, but I do think that there's been a lot of progress in the last 30 years, and a lot more people are just open-minded and, willing to see that it's just, it's just another way to approach spirituality. It's just another way to approach how you understand the world. I usually find when I actually start talking to people of any religious background that we have a lot more in common than we have differences.
That's right. Which is a good thing. I think that, even with that in the paranormal and everything like that, I think people are getting more of an understanding and more accepting of it than they were, 20, 30 years ago or whatever. Which is a step in the right direction.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think there's a lot more acceptance than there used to be. And there's at least a lot more willingness to keep an open mind, we'll say. And, speaking of the paranormal investigation, I've been saying this for a couple of years now, that I love that we're moving into a place where paranormal investigators are more willing to consider other possibilities for what might be going on in a location besides just either human ghosts or, some kind of negative entity, whether we want to call that a demon or what have you.
Right.
I love that there seems to be this sort of opening up to a lot of other possibilities, whether it's like indigenous spirits or fairies or all sorts of things.
Right. And like elementals have, we've come across some of those. They talked about it at one location in Cedar Falls about a possible elemental being there. But yeah, that's a different one that we've recently come across. So
yep, and that was something in the 90s. I don't ever remember anybody talking about that.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. No. Yeah. No. Yeah. You're coming up with all these kinds of things now.
Yeah.
Now, in your book, Into Shadow, you talk about all different things. You talk about elves, you talk about dragons, but you also talk about selkies. So for those listeners that don't know what a selkie is, can you kind of explain what a selkie is?
Oh, sure. I love selkies. That's why I put them in the novel, because I think they need to be more appreciated.
Yeah.
Yeah, selkie folklore runs a huge range, actually. You can find them in Iceland,
Mhm.
you can find them in Ireland, Scotland, all sorts of, different cultures along those areas. And there's different names for them, of course, in different places, but
Mhm.
it's basically the idea that it's something that looks like a seal when
Mhm.
it's in the water,
Mhm.
but they can come on land and they can take off the seal skin like it's a jacket.
Mhm.
Or I guess we would say a onesie might be a
Yeah.
better
Yeah. Yeah.
comparison,
Yeah. You're right.
you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Um, and once the seal skin comes off, they would look human
Mhm.
on land.
Mhm.
And as long as they have the seal skin, they can go back in the water.
Mhm.
But if they lose it or if it gets stolen, which is what a lot of the folklore is about,
Right.
then they're kind of trapped on land. They can't go
Mhm.
back
Mhm.
without that. So we have all these stories about them, as seals, as selkies in the water. They're supposed to help like fishermen, and
Mhm.
um, sometimes like there's stories of people who get shipwrecked during a storm, and the selkie like helps them,
Mhm.
saves them from drowning,
Mhm.
that kind of thing. But then we also have kind of the flip side to the stories, these selkie women who get their seal skin stolen,
Mhm.
and then end up not having any choice but to marry the person that
Right.
stole the sealskin.
Mhm.
Uh, and usually in those stories, they live with the person and they have children, and then finally one day, either the selkie or one of the children finds the sealskin,
Mhm.
and then the selkie immediately returns to the ocean,
Mhm.
kind of goes back to her own people.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Mhm.
it's great folklore.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I had never heard of it. I actually hadn't heard of a selfie until I read your book, and I was like, oh, this is so interesting. But it kind of reminded me of like some of the books that I wrote, um, read about like the wolves that would change
Mm.
into human form and things like that. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. Like, I was just like, this is right up my alley because I like to read that kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
yeah, and then you talked about different types of like elves and things like that
Mhm.
in the book, and you kind of brought everybody together because you had people from all kinds of walks of life
Mhm.
kind of joining together in this crusade, which was amazing.
Yeah, I
But
mean, the best kind of quest is the kind of quest where you get all sorts of
so
different people,
people, uh-huh,
yeah, coming together for sure.
right. I wish
Um,
that could happen in real life. You
so
know?
so do I. That would be nice. Maybe we can work towards
Is
that.
that right? Yeah.
Uh, yeah, yeah. So I definitely include elves because that's kind of a fantasy staple. You,
Uh-huh.
you have to.
Right.
I do base mine a lot more on folklore,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which everyone's gonna get tired of me saying that, but
Nope, that's fine.
it's
We have a lot of people that like folklore, so go away with it.
yeah, it's such a big background for me, and
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to do something that was at least a little bit different, which is why I have the Selkies in there, and then
Mm-hmm.
the elves I'm kind of basing on sort of like early English beliefs,
Mm-hmm.
which is why we see elves connected a lot to places, so like mountain elves,
Mm-hmm.
meadow elves, river elves. That's all stuff we actually find in the
Mm-hmm.
old folklore,
Right.
and I thought it was just fun to go that direction with it.
Oh yeah. It was well put together and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And like I said, I know I have some friends that are going to be totally interested in this book, so I'm going to have to share it with them if they're not listening already. But um
Awesome. Thank you.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, do you have a favorite folklore?
I mean, Selkies are way up
Up
there.
there? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I do love a good Selkie story.
Hmm.
There's actually a movie called The Secret of Roan Inish, which
Oh.
came out in the 90s. I saw
Uh-huh.
it
Uh-huh.
when I was a teenager,
Uh-huh.
and it's about Selkies, and it kind
Hmm.
of has a couple different Selkie stories in it,
Hmm. Hmm.
in an interesting way. So
Oh
yeah, if
wow.
people are interested in Selkies, I recommend checking that out.
That okay, all right. And then you also dabble in some mythology too. Is that correct? Do you kind of
Yep. Yeah, from my perspective,
hmm
I see, folklore is sort of the newer
hmm
beliefs, the newer
hmm
approach to beliefs, and mythology would be sort of the older, or what we would consider like the older, the classical
hmm
kind of beliefs. So, yeah, I do a lot of research and studying, again, particularly the Irish
Hmm.
mythology.
Hmm.
I actually taught myself Old and Middle Irish so that I could translate the myths from the original language. Because a lot of what we have that for translations are over 100 years old and they're a little dodgy.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I like to tell people that I learned Old and Middle Irish out of spite
Yeah.
because I one of my favorite stories, I was reading and I read a newer version. I'm like, wait a second, like there's some really big differences here.
Hmm.
And yeah, it turned out the older version, which is the free public domain version,
Hmm.
the guy who translated it was very, very Victorian and
Oh,
just didn't include things that he felt were like inappropriate.
appropriate. Oh, huh.
Yeah. Um, and I was like, well, that's not okay.
Oh, yeah.
Can't do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Just because they
So,
don't like it. It's part of
yeah. Like he
because
actually he actually took out an entire passage, an entire scene, and he footnoted, and in the footnote literally says something along the lines of, I don't think this is appropriate
oh my
for for the audience. Because it's very sexual, that passage. But yeah, he just decided it's not appropriate for people to read, so he
gosh.
just didn't include it. And I was
Oh
like,
my
no.
gosh. Wow. Okay. That's
Yeah.
oh my. Okay.
So
None of you
that was
guys
my
are gonna
big
go.
motivation.
Yeah, yeah. To get it out there, like set things straight. Like, okay, here we go. This is how it goes. Like, don't leave out the bad stuff or the inappropriate stuff. Everybody wants to hear that, okay?
I mean, when we're talking about the old myths, we're really talking about what would have been like the soap operas of the
Right.
day.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly. Right.
these
Yeah.
these were these were all the stories that like in the winter when it was dark and cold and people couldn't
Yeah.
go out much, you would
Hmm.
just sit around and the storyteller would be like, here's Days of Our Irish Gods
Gods.
Part
Yeah.
5, you
Right.
know.
Instead of these our lives. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's
Right.
it's all it's all like all sorts of people with anger issues and torrid affairs and
Uh-huh.
you know,
Yeah.
interesting stuff.
Stuff. Right. Exactly. It's like don't leave out the good stuff. Okay, that stuff is gets people's interest peaked.
Yeah.
Give us the dirty deeds. Okay.
Well, that's what makes it a good story,
Right.
you know.
Exactly. It does for sure.
Yeah.
Now, there's a bunch of weird creatures and things like that in folklore and mythology. Do you think
Really.
there's any bases that some of these could be real?
I mean, I think we'd have to sort of start by defining real.
Oh yeah.
um, it's sort of like when we talk about ghosts or ghost real.
Uh-huh.
Uh, you know, everyone's going to have a different opinion.
Right.
Um, a lot of the folklore, the premise of it, the reason that it's folklore and not fiction
Mm-hmm.
is because people believe that it's true.
Mm-hmm.
They believe that this story happened. They
Mm-hmm.
believe that those beings were encountered. And if we're talking about like fairies and folklore, there are still people every day in the 21st century who
Mm-hmm.
have experiences
Mm-hmm.
with what we would call fairies. There's
Mm-hmm.
a project that's going on. It's called the Fairy Census.
Oh.
Um, and it's basically Dr. Simon Young
Mm-hmm.
has been doing this survey. The first one was 2014 to 2018, and he's just finished up a second one
Uh-huh.
where he just asked people to report on encounters they've had. Like, have you
Uh-huh.
seen a fairy?
Mm-hmm.
Have you had an experience with a fairy? And describe it to him, and then he records it. And the first one is available free online if
Oh.
anyone's curious to
Oh,
see
cool.
like what modern fairy encounters look like.
Uh-huh.
Um, so yeah, by that measure, I mean, I guess it's as real as
Mm-hmm.
as anything else
Yeah. Have
in
you had
this realm.
have you had any encounters?
I believe I have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I actually think a lot more people have than probably realize they have.
Mm-hmm.
Because our modern view of fairies is so sort of that Disney Tinkerbell
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And, in folklore, when they're talking about fairies, they're talking about a whole range of different things.
Mm-hmm.
There's fairy hounds and fairy cats and fairy horses, and, most fairies or elves would look fairly human.
Mm-hmm.
So, I've talked to people that have described encountering these beings that looked very much like a human, but were acting like
Yeah.
they, maybe had some supernatural knowledge going
Uh-huh.
on, or appeared out of nowhere,
Mm-hmm.
disappeared, that sort of thing. I have a story I've told before over the years where I
Uh-huh.
was with a friend, and we were in the middle of a small city near where
Mm-hmm.
I live,
Mm-hmm.
and by the side of a fairly busy road, and everything got very quiet. All the cars stopped, all the noise stopped, and we saw these two dogs
Mm-hmm.
coming down the sidewalk on the other side of the street. Two black dogs, and it was kind of weird, but we were young and didn't
Mm-hmm.
think too much of it. And then my friend kind of looked at me and jokingly was like, "Wouldn't it be funny if they crossed the street to our side of the street?" And as
Uh-huh.
soon as he said it, like literally as soon as the words were out of his mouth, the two dogs immediately started walking across the street towards us.
Mm-hmm.
So I was probably like 20 when this
Yeah.
happened. I think
Uh-huh.
he was like 17 or 18. So of course we panicked, you know,
Right.
as you do when you're
Uh-huh.
basically a teenager. And we ran inside the building we were in front of and closed the door, and we looked out and the dogs were gone. So we're
Oh.
like, well, that's weird because
Uh-huh.
there's really nowhere,
For them to
you
go
know.
to. Yeah.
Yeah, not really, not that quickly because they weren't
Mm-hmm.
running or anything. They were just walking.
Mm-hmm.
So we waited a few seconds and we went back out and we looked and they were past us on the sidewalk,
Mm-hmm.
still just walking side by side. And there was no physical way they could have gotten past us because there were all these windows where we were.
Right.
No way they could have crossed in front of us without us seeing them. And there was nowhere for them to have gone around.
Hmm.
So it was just very
Very.
uncanny,
Uh-huh.
you know?
Yeah. Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And then as soon as they were out of sight, the noises came back, cars started coming back. It was just very strange.
Yeah. That's really weird. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, you have some. I know you said you have another like little short story or something coming out at the end of this month. Is that right?
I have another book on
Book. Yeah.
Freya.
Okay. On
Yeah.
Friday. Yeah. But you have some other ones that you have written previously, correct?
Mhm.
And
Yep.
like I had touched base with, Odin and Thor.
hmm
Do you want to kind of tell us a little bit about them? Because I'm sure it's completely different than what we have seen in the movies. Okay, they don't actually look like Chris Hemsworth.
Yeah. I I mean, it's a shame in a way,
Yeah, yeah,
No
right.
offense to any Norse gods listening to
Yeah,
this, but
right.
you know, Chris Hemsworth does make a very nice Thor.
Yes, he
Um,
does.
yeah, there's it's interesting when you look at the Marvel movies versus the folklore and the mythology because there's certain things that they do have that are very similar. Like
Hmm.
Thor does have the hammer,
Hmm. Hmm.
Mjolnir. Odin does have one eye because, like in the movie, he's got the eye patch.
Right. Yep.
Heimdall is the guardian of the Rainbow Bridge.
Hmm. Hmm.
That part they got pretty
Goosebumps
okay.
talking about
Um,
this right now. I don't know why. Sorry.
that's okay. Besides the whole, Thor doesn't look like Chris Helmsworth
Yeah,
thing,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
tragic.
yeah,
And Loki doesn't look like Tom Hiddleston either,
yeah, I know.
unfortunately.
Yeah,
But
darn.
yeah, I think probably in the popular imagination and a lot of artwork they do,
Yeah, yeah.
but not so much in the mythology.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, so in the mythology, Thor and Loki are not brothers. They are sort of often like traveling companions, like they were
Mm-hmm.
friends.
Mm-hmm.
But Loki was actually Odin's blood brother. They had
Oh.
sworn like an oath to be brothers.
Uh-huh.
Um, so a little bit different
Different.
there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um, and Loki is definitely sort of a mischief causing person,
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Mm-hmm.
and causes some problems, especially at the towards the end of the mythic cycle.
Mm-hmm.
But he was much more like integrated into things, I think, than the sort of Marvel approach. Oh, and Hel is Loki's daughter, um,
Oh, okay.
their sister.
Sure. Uh-huh.
So, yeah, it was another difference.
So,
I'm
okay.
trying to think of all the
Oh, the
movies right now.
movies are out. Yeah, I know. There's quite a few of them.
You know, they've got a lot going on.
Uh-huh.
Uh, and obviously in the mythology, they aren't aliens living on a technologically advanced planet named
Planet.
Asgard.
Right.
A
Yeah.
little different
Different.
there.
Uh-huh.
But yeah. So it is kind of interesting. I think a lot of people, though, they get their understanding of
Mm-hmm.
the myths from the Marvel movies
Mm-hmm.
and the
Mm-hmm.
comic books. Probably more the movies, though.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think for sure. Except for I think my daughter's husband, he or husband. They might as well be married. They've been together forever. But her boyfriend,
Yeah.
he is really into comics. So her and she's very into movies. So they like to, and especially this kind of movie. So they
Yeah.
kind of battle back and forth on who's right with things.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Different canon, and people will do that between
Uh-huh.
the mythology and the Marvel movies too. Like
Right.
battle and argue about
Hmm.
details and whether this happened that way or this way or all of that
Right.
for sure.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Now I know that you have done some classes and things like that. Do you still do classes that people can like I mean, how do you do that? Do you do it through Skype, Zoom, in person? Like,
Sure. Mostly at this point, I do teach some classes on a platform. It's called the Irish Pagan School,
mhm,
and they offer an assortment of material that's focused specifically on Irish mythology, Irish folklore, Irish culture,
mhm.
um, all of that sort of thing. So I have some classes available through them, mostly on fairies. I have one on the Banshee, for example, and
Oh yeah.
yep, and one on changelings, and one on just fairies,
Hmm.
kind of in general.
Hmm.
So I definitely do that, and then occasionally I'll offer my own sort of individual, on Zoom kind of thing. But a lot of what I do outside of that would be like I do presentations at universities,
Hmm.
and sort of that kind of a setting.
Hmm.
So it's a little bit of everything. Um, I do have a YouTube channel,
Oh
so
yeah. Yeah.
if that counts as classes, I
Well, yeah. Everybody goes to YouTube. What is it? Like, I gotta check
it's
this.
just under Morgan Daimler.
Okay. Sure.
I
Okay.
have hours and hours and hours of me talking about fairy folklore.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, for people if you're interested.
Oh
Good free
yeah.
content.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, that's that is something that does fascinate me, and I know it fascinated my younger daughter. She used to be very fascinated with fairies. She only
Yeah.
talked about it for a while, but there was a time where she was setting up things to try to
That's
get fairies. Like
yeah.
she was just very intrigued by it.
Yep.
So,
If you talk to my mom,
uh-huh.
um, not that I encourage anyone to go out there and find my mother, but if if you were talking to my mom,
Yeah.
she would tell you stories about when I was really little. I used to, like, I would write letters to the
Oh,
fairies. I'd put them on the windowsill,
oh my gosh.
and I used to build little fairy houses out in the yard. Like, yeah, I
Uh-huh.
definitely had fairies on the
Fairies on the
brain
brain. Uh-huh.
from yeah from a very young age. So
Oh wow,
I
that is so cool. You were trying to catch fairies and I was trying to catch spirits when I was
yeah.
little. And
Same.
I swore up and down that there was a mermaid in this. We live out by a little lake, and I
Yeah,
swore up and down that there was a mermaid in there for like the longest time. I've never
that's
caught it,
cool.
but I really thought that there was a mermaid in that lake. I don't know what it
That's
was.
cool.
Yeah.
One of the most famous mermaids in Irish folklore or
Uh-huh.
mythology. She's a little bit of both.
Uh-huh.
Her name was Liban, but she was a freshwater mermaid.
Oh wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
She was supposed to, this big river had flooded,
Mhm.
and she and her little dog got trapped in this underwater cave
Mhm.
and survived somehow for a year. We're not supposed to ask too many questions about that in the story, but
Yeah.
yeah. Just suspend your disbelief.
Yeah.
Um, and after a year, she was really bored
Uh-huh.
and sort of prayed to, like, be able to leave the cave. And so she got turned into a salmon from the waist down, and her
Oh.
dog got turned into an otter.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. I have
And
not heard that one.
yeah, that goes back
That's
to like the
interesting.
12th century. It's really old.
Oh wow.
There's some churches in Ireland, if you go to, you'll find carvings of this mermaid figure
Uh-huh.
inside the church.
Oh wow, that's so fascinating.
Yeah, it's a really cool story. So fresh
Yeah.
mermaids, that's the
It's
thing.
so there could be a mermaid out in this lake, Kim. There could be. We're gonna have to
You
go
never
look.
know. You never know.
I'm just so fascinated by all that stuff because I mean, our world is so big and obviously I believe that we're not the only ones here. You know, we investigate the paranormal, but
Mhm.
also I'm very big into like interdimensional, Sasquatch, aliens, things of that nature. I mean, there could be so many things out there that we don't even really know about.
Yeah.
So what's to say some of these things aren't really true, or they could have been back then?
You know, this is something I say a lot to people when
Mhm.
they kind of question, like, are these things out there?
Mhm.
Could they be proven? We constantly hear about animals that science told us was extinct
Right.
for 100 years. There was just a bird, I can't remember what state it was in, but this
Mhm.
pink bird in like Wisconsin or something that
Mhm.
hadn't been seen in like 150 years
Mhm.
that was spotted.
Oh wow.
So, there's all sorts of stuff out there, and there's
Mhm.
all sorts of things that we just don't see or
Mhm.
aren't aware of, and that doesn't mean they're not there.
Mhm. Right.
Obviously for that bird to be there, there's been other birds before it.
Right.
So, you know,
Exactly.
at least two.
At least, yeah. At least two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, anytime I think about, like, fairies or cryptids or
Mhm.
spirits or any of that, I'm like, well, there's so much out there, you
Mhm.
know. There's
Mhm.
so much potentially out there.
Right. And I don't think we're ever going to get all the information that we want.
No.
I mean, we can try, but I don't think we're ever going to get to that point where we're like, aha, this is, exactly how this, whatever, there's just too much in this world that we don't know about, is,
Yeah.
is my thought, anyways.
Yeah.
And I think
Well,
there's other planets, that have, probably living creatures and
oh
inhabitants
yeah.
or whatever on there as well.
Yeah, like there's a lot going on out there.
Yeah.
And I mean, even on the earth, if you look at the ocean, I think it's like 10% of the ocean that we've actually explored, and
Mm-hmm.
we're constantly finding like new fish and new animals and
Mm-hmm.
things that live in places that we thought it wasn't possible to live,
Right.
So
Yeah.
why not
Right.
aliens, and why not, all sorts of other things.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. For sure. That's what I believe as well. So.
Yeah, yeah, I'm right there with you.
Now, do you have? You said you have a YouTube channel. Do you have any like social media? So if we have any listeners that have more questions that we haven't answered and they'd like to pick your brain a little bit, or I know we have a lot of people that like folklore and stuff, so they might just come at you with a bunch of stuff.
Oh,
I never know, but
that's fine. That's fine. I'm always open to social media contact. I just do try to let people know. Sometimes it takes me a few days
oh yeah, for
to
sure.
get back to people.
Uh-huh.
But sadly, I am on like all forms of social media at this point. Just it's like a hydra. You start
I
with
think I did see you
one.
pop up on Twitter.
Yep.
I think, yeah,
Yeah, I'm
I've
on
seen you on there on our Buzz
I'm on
Radio.
Twitter, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram. I'm on Blue Sky and Mastodon now, although not as active on those because I haven't figured them out yet. But
I
and
don't. I just saw that. I'm like, I don't even know what the hell this is. Like somebody
yeah,
posted, I'm on this, and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much. It's too much for
yeah,
me.
it's a lot. And I'm on everything under Morgan Daimler. So
Okay. Okay. So you're under
uh,
that under your name. Okay.
yes,
Perfect.
And I will give my little disclaimer here because social
Sure.
media is ridiculous now. I never like ask people for money. I don't private message people telling them I've been told by spirits to contact them because I guess that's a thing now. There's a lot of scammers out there.
It is. I get a lot of it every day.
Yeah, it's
Can
ridiculous.
I read you? All you have to pay me is this, or do you want
Yep.
to be ambassador for my special sun goggles, or just random
Yep.
weird stuff like that lately. And I'm like, oh my gosh! And there's people that I follow that I know would never ask me for
Yep.
money, but here they are popping into my thing, and I'm like, okay, I know this is not
Not
them,
yep. Yep. I 100% never do that.
Yeah,
So
you're right. Yes.
if anyone does try to follow me on social media and gets a weird private message, it's not
Uh-huh.
me.
Right. Yeah.
It's
Exactly.
it's fake me.
It's fake you.
Yeah.
And no, there's just so much of that lately. I mean, it's just anybody. They'll just copy anybody. Oh, I'm
Yeah.
going to be this person today and, whatever, and see what I can get. And it's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's really sad. I have a friend who owns a store,
Oh, uh-huh.
and it's sort of a esoteric, witchy kind of
A
store.
store. Yeah.
And it's like a plague. She has so many fake accounts out there, and people message her all the time to say, "Oh, they sent money," and she's like, "Well, I don't know what to tell you because it wasn't me." It's
Yeah.
just a mess.
Oh no.
So,
Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
don't send strangers money.
Yeah. Don't send strangers money. Okay. Like, use your brain. Okay. Like, most
Yep.
people don't ask for that unless, you're at a store or something. Just don't pay anybody
Right.
online. Don't pay anybody online. Like, seriously.
Yep. Good life advice.
Yes, it is. They didn't know they were going to get this on the show tonight, that we're giving life advice. Yep. I pay cash. You don't pay cash, too bad. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Did you hear? I think it's Sweden. They're going to like no cash.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the whole country is only going to have credit, which is so weird to
Weird.
me.
That is bizarre. Because, like,
Yeah.
some elderly people don't really know how to use that. I mean, I've come across that in my job. I'm a dental assistant, and we have a lot of them that still write checks. Like
Yep.
they don't know how to use a card. They don't know how to use the internet. Like, and so many things are going, fill out your health history online. They don't know how to do that,
I
and
know. I know. It's getting really difficult if you don't know how to use the technology. You can't make appointments, you can't refill prescriptions,
things.
yeah,
Right.
all sorts of things.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's getting out of control. We're like clearly going off into a squirrel rabbit hole. But that's okay because that's our show. We always get off topic.
I mean, we started out ranting about technology. Now we're back
We're
to
back to
ranting about
ranting about technology.
technology.
It's a whole
Yep.
thing. Like we had a gentleman on, we were talking about AI, like,
Yep.
intelligence and things like that. And on our Skype, all of a sudden it popped up and said, "Hi, I'm your Skype AI person. Do you have any questions?" Is going on. I'm like, how
Oh
weird is
no.
that? We're literally doing a show on that, and you're popping up on our screen like it's because they're listening to us.
Yeah. Sad but true.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, and the week after that, on TV, all you heard about was AI. I know. I know. It's
yeah.
been everywhere.
It's like the big topic, and I mean, I definitely have strong opinions about it, but I
Yeah.
do think, there's some interesting questions about sort of the intersection of AI with things like spirits or, you know,
Mm-hmm.
other sorts of intelligence.
Uh-huh.
Not the AI isn't actually AI at this point. It's just like auto response kind of stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there's some interesting implications, I
I
think,
think
with
with
it.
that, yeah, for sure. I don't know. I know my kids were using it on whatever they use, Snapchat or something. They were trying to tell it to do stuff. I don't know. It's like I don't do any of that stuff, so I don't know. I'm bad. I'm like an old person. I don't use, you know, I'm not on all this stuff all the time except for the show. So
Yeah, that's a good thing though.
yeah,
Stay
yeah,
stay away from the AI.
that's
It's
right.
just trouble.
Yeah, I don't need your help. So if you're
Yeah,
listening, don't pop up on my Skype this time or in my
yeah.
or send me texts or whatever. But now with your books, I know you can find them at John Hunt's Publishing. Are they on Amazon as well?
Yep.
Barnes and Noble, kind of
Yep.
anywhere you can find your books,
Yep. I
any
have
books.
a selection of self-published books. Those would be on Amazon. And then everything I have through it's Collective Ink now, but used to be John Hunt.
Okay.
Moon Books and Cosmic Egg are the particular imprints I write for. That would be pretty much everywhere. Amazon, Barnes and Noble, your local library, if you request it, they can get them in. I am a huge supporter of the library system, so
Yeah. Mhm,
I
mhm,
really encourage people, go to your library, use your library. If you want to
mhm.
see my book there, just ask for it and see if they can get it.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, libraries are awesome.
So they are. I used to spend a lot of time. I haven't been there more so now. I'm too busy with work and kids'
Yeah,
activities and everything. But before that, I wasn't at home reading a book, I was in the library getting a bunch of books to read. Like
yep,
that's all I that's all I did growing up was I sat in my bedroom and I would read books on books on books on books on books on books and books. Like
yeah,
he'll read all the time. Anything you put in front of him, he'll read. Yeah.
yeah.
He don't like ghosts with go I mean like we do. Yeah. But he'll read all my
Oh, right.
books.
That's awesome.
As long as he doesn't actually physically see something or
Yep,
something spook him, it's
yep.
okay.
But he'll read it.
Yeah, right.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, that's fair. I like to read about bears, but I don't actually want to meet a bear.
Yeah,
You know,
right. Yeah. I don't
so
think
I
I'd want
can't blame him.
yeah. I don't like to hear him that much. He at least reads the book. Yes, that's for sure. Yeah. Yeah. Pretty soon he'll tell us how to do it. Yeah. Then we'll just say, well, then you're gonna have to go on one and show us how to do it.
It's cool that he's interested enough to read the books, though.
Yeah, for sure. But as
Yeah.
soon as we start like going through anything like video or anything that we have, be like, oh, what are you watching? Oh, we're
So,
watching something from investigation. Okay, bye. He's out.
yeah.
Yep. Won't come out until we're done.
Yep.
All right. Well, before we wrap things up, I just want to let everybody know you can find Morgan on pretty much any kind of social media platform. Look up Morgan Daimler. She's got a YouTube account on, talks about fairies. If you're into that, go there. All of her books you can find at any bookstore, pretty much Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Go to your library, look them up. Um, her last book, Into Shadow, that I just read, I absolutely loved it. I highly recommend it. So please go read it. It is very good. And like I said, I think it kind of brings people from all different walks of life together and they work together, which is kind of something that I think we all should kind of work on. Just saying. But anyways, it was a pleasure talking to you. I love all your stories on folklore and your mythology and everything. And so thank you for everybody that was listening tonight. We appreciate each and every one of you. And thank you, Morgan, for being on the show. It was an absolute pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you for having me on. I had a great time.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Anytime. Anytime you want to come on, you just let me know.
Definitely.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Definitely. Yeah. Just let me know. I'd love to come back.
All right. Perfect. Peace out, everybody.